Welcome to the Does Anything Matter podcast, where Patrick and Pepin talk about the most age-old question of does anything actually matter? Welcome to the Does Anything Matter podcast. I'm your host Pepin, and this is
Carpenter.
Carpenter. All right. I thought you were gonna go by your first name.
You said Pepin.
Well,
so I said Carpenter. All right, so I'm Patrick. Let's scrap that.
Okay. Well, no.
Apparently, he's offended by my last name. So
I'm very offended because your last name has the profession in it. And
okay.
My last name is French.
You want me to say banker? Because that's my actual profession. All right, so I'm Patrick.
Patrick Banker.
Apparently, this is Pepin.
Yep, Pepin. I mean, my profession is being French, so.
Okay, gotcha. Are you actually French?
French Canadian. I'm not actually from France. My family is though.
Oh, that's funny. I didn't know that.
It's like back in the day, they went from France to Canada, and they hung out there for like a day, and then went to the U.S. So technically French Canadian.
Gotcha. I think that I'm Polish. Most people just say that I'm Irish because of my name and don't actually ask me. Mm-hmm. But I guess I should find out someday.
And so the podcast is named Does Anything Matter? Why? Because damn.
Yeah, exactly. Damn. And does it matter? We're going to talk about it. Whatever it is, we're going to find out.
I think the thing that we're going to talk today is, does killing animals really matter? I mean, probably not, right? Animal suffering, it's not a big deal.
No,
especially if it's
that?
Like baby whales. Like, right. fuck the baby whales.
Exactly. Listen, this isn't a PETA discussion, so we just want to put that out there right now. But,
I thought we were going to talk about people eating tasting animals.
Okay. We are, and how those people are immoral. But, just kidding. Seriously, though.
Okay.
Every one of them.
The first thing to get out of the way here is that I eat meat. I mean, not just like meat which is procured from animals, but also like the tasty kind of meat, you know?
Yeah, okay. And so we should also note... Sorry. We should also note I recently became a vegetarian, so that's why we decided to talk about this today. When I first said that I was going to be a vegetarian back in July of 2019, a lot of people said to me, why exactly? It wasn't something I expected people to ask me. Mm-hmm. I don't know. Honestly, anytime somebody's ever told me that they were a vegetarian in the past, I always just go, dude, awesome, good for you, you know? And so one thing that's interesting to talk about is why that's inherently good, or why there's this stigma that people say, awesome, good for you. Is it really good? That's one of the things we're going to talk about.
So I was kind of surprised, not by you turning vegetarian. I mean, you know, you are a very morally considerate person, and it seems like something you've been thinking about for a while. So, you know, it's not like a big surprise, but, you know, the sudden switch was a surprise because I expected you to talk more about like your ethical thoughts about animals and stuff like that and eating them, but all of a sudden it's like, nope, I'm vegetarian now. And it's like, oh, okay, that's a sudden switch.
Yeah, it kind of was, and I don't know. It maybe has to do with just ADD and what am I going to do today? Well, I know I'm going to stop eating meat. But there actually was some thought process behind it. Some of it has to do with my belief in Buddhism, and being vegan is part of being Buddhist. I'm not entirely vegan. I went vegetarian. I'm kind of moving towards that. But that was part of it. Mm-hmm. And the interesting thing is it's not so much about like not hurting animals, right? It's about utility and ability to replace. Mm-hmm. So, like when you hear the term sometimes like subsistence hunting, right? Have you ever heard that term?
I think so, but remind me of what it means.
So it's like if you live in a homestead or you live in a very sort of oppressive climate, like say you live in northern Alaska or you live in a less developed country and you don't have access to a grocery store, or maybe you homestead up in a mountain, so it's going to take you a half a day to get to town, right? The people who live in these conditions, they hunt as a means of survival, right? So in that case, it's not so much that they're killing animals because they want to, but they have to, because they don't have access to the same stuff we have in urban areas, right?
I see. So substantive meaning that they are having to hunt to sustain themselves.
Yes, and then they will use the furs to, keep themselves warm. They'll use the bones to make tools. And so the idea of subsistence hunting is that you use every part of the animal to sustain your own well-being.
Okay. Now, is it required that they would use every part of the animal, or is it simply that that's just tends what to happen?
It's not required. It tends to be what happened. Because a lot of people that subscribe to this belief, because they're removed from society, they don't have access to some of the same things without coming, far away from where they're staying. But at the same time, it's also sort of a connection to the land. Like people who choose that lifestyle have often developed that kind of connection with nature, that it feels like you're connecting with it. You're able to get everything that you need from it, and you don't have to use man-made tools. It's a very sort of Native American way of looking at things.
I'm a little bit skeptical here, but let's keep going. Because I'm just thinking about. So, for instance, there was certain Native American tribes. One tribe in particular that were hunting buffalo, right? And this is idea out there, which is that they use every part of the buffalo, which it's not really true. Because one main way of hunting the buffalo they had is, the buffalo would gather in these huge, big herds. And essentially, they would cause these buffalo to stampede in a certain way towards a cliff. And what happened is that, the buffalo that would try to stop, towards the edge of the cliff, but the other buffalo were still pushing because they didn't know there's a cliff right there. So they would end up pushing all these other buffalo off the cliff. And then, all the Native Americans would go towards, the bottom of the cliff where they all died. And, take what they could, but there'd be like tons and tons of just carcasses that would not get used. And so there's a huge waste there, but it was an effective means for them to hunt because they could get a lot of, as many buffalo as they need. Whether it's sustainable or not, that's another question. But
yeah,
they definitely did not use every part of the buffalo there. They left many buffaloes untouched.
Yeah. I mean, that's sort of like going into McDonald's and being like, all right, so I think I want 10 Big Macs. I'm not sure if I'm that hungry, but, I'm going to eat some of them.
We'll find out.
Right. Yeah, hopefully they're good later. But yeah, no, I'm sure there's exceptions to that. But I'm just saying that hunting was a spiritual practice. Before grocery stores and all kinds of modernization. When you're talking about subsistence hunting for survival, you're talking about a more intimate process. And so you may not use every part of the animal, but that's in a utopian situation. That's what you would do. There are tribes in Africa that before they go on a hunt, they pray for success, but they also pray for the land and for fertility. And, they rely on the rains. They rely on being able to have a successful hunt. And so, we don't have that experience where the way that you and I grew up. We don't have to pray for rain, and we don't have to pray for the fact that we can find an animal that's going to sustain our village. It's just not been something that we've experienced. And I think sometimes we take that for granted.
Well, we take it for granted because, we control those factors, right? I mean, it's like I think we can't take it for granted for a good reason, which is that we have, produced these systems which just make the cost of food very, very low. Say agricultural farming. I think farming is the big thing. So instead of hunting animals, we just contain the animals in these cages. Be they small, cages which are very cool to them, or whether they're expensive free range cages. Some sort of cage or some sort of container for them, and we breed them. Or with crops, we put the crops in a certain cage, and we take care of them, tend to them, we feed them. And we do it in a way that can sustain not just us, but other people as well. And we do account for those other factors like rain. So in California, there's been issues with rain at certain times, and it's caused issues with crops because if crops don't get rain, it's not enough water for irrigation, then the crops don't succeed, and these people's livelihood is in jeopardy. So those people are definitely praying for rain, but we ourselves who are not connected in that same direct kind of way, we do take it for granted, but we take for granted because the system is already established.
Right, because we're provided for, essentially. You're saying that if you're somebody that is running those irrigation systems, or you're a farmer, you're somebody that's responsible for providing these things for society, then you might have a different perspective. But since the systems are in place for us, we don't have to worry about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We lowered the barrier to that thing, like to such a high, such a degree where we don't have to worry about it. In the same way, like, jobs are pretty available. Money is pretty available. You could talk about maybe not enough money is available because it's hard to get a job that pays super well and can provide for everything, you and your family and everything else. But there is still an availability for jobs out there, and people aren't usually worried about, say, making bare minimum. At least in America, you talk about other countries and such. We're taking a certain context here, and certainly there are homeless people out there. But the average person, like, they're not. I mean, they're maybe worried about money, but not in the same way that it's do or die. Like,
yeah, that's true. So, I mean, there's obviously different needs in different areas. So this kind of gets us to the crux of it. So let's just go right into it, right? The question is there some moral value to being vegetarian, right? Is it moral? And then, like, on the converse, if you eat meat, does that make you immoral?
Mm-hmm. So I think the first question is, when you say a moral value, do you mean like something that makes you feel good? Or are we talking about something which, say, like a virtue?
Let's say a virtue. Let's say more universal. Like, okay, in Buddhism, and also just for the record, this is in a lot of other spiritual beliefs, but in Buddhism they say do not harm, right? Mm-hmm. And when they say that, it's referring to other sentient beings. So if you believe that animals have the ability to feel pain, which, I mean, obviously they do, and you regard all sentient beings as equal, which is one of the tenets of Buddhism, then you would have to sort of apply the same principles to animals as you would with humans. So just under that particular prescription of Buddhism, then you would have to say that eating an animal is kind of the same as eating a human. But if you don't subscribe to Buddhism, obviously you wouldn't believe that. Mm-hmm. So rather than saying, all right, we're all under the same Mandela, let's just operate under the principle of do not harm. So if we say the virtue is we don't want to harm other sentient beings, then what morality do we assign to eating meat when we know where it comes from?
Mm-hmm. So with that being a virtue, the converse is not necessarily true, though. So it may be a virtue not to harm, but it's not necessarily immorality or morally punishable if you do happen to harm something. Is that true?
So I think it can be, because when we talk about subsistence hunting, for example, the outcome would be that you would die if you didn't do it, right? Because you're in a situation where you have to eat this animal to survive. So I think the outcome is as important as the intent in this case, right? The intent is to harm the animal, but the outcome, the reason you're doing it, is to survive. And so you're talking about an equivalent exchange of life, because in this case, the animal dies and the human lives. And if you don't kill the animal, then the animal lives and the human dies. So you're talking about, if you do believe that all sentient beings deserve dignity and, deserve an opportunity at life, then that's a moral equivalency. So it's not morally reprehensible to kill the animal if it's in exchange for your own life. Does that make sense?
It makes sense in the most part, but where I am a little bit uncertain is that you're necessarily assigning more, say, value to your own life than the animals, which, I would agree that a human is more valuable than a dog. And so I don't disagree with that, but where I'm disagreeing is is there something within the tenet of Buddhism or within, say, your philosophy of vegetarianism or veganism, which would conclude that your life is more important than the life of a dog, or a human life is more important than the life of some animal?
So, no, I actually think that you misunderstood a little bit, because what I said was that it was a moral equivalency. So I'm not saying that the human or the animal is inferior. What I'm saying is that if one or the other is going to die, then let's say that you choose not to eat the animal, then you die.
Yeah.
That's not immoral that you made that choice, but you died. And then if you eat the animal, then you live and the animal dies. In either situation, a sentient being died, right? So you have the same outcome if you believe that sentient beings are all worthy of life.
So I get it. It's like life for life. It's like it equals in that sense, but at the same time, you're taking the action to kill this other animal.
I see what you're saying, that because the action lies in your hands, that the act itself is an admission that your life is more valuable than the animal.
Yeah, you're assigning more value to your own life. So here's like a bad example. Like let's imagine like the classic railroad problem where there's a train going down a railroad and there's like two different paths to go down to, and on one side is George Carlin and the other side is a baby. Well, of course you're gonna have it go towards the baby because George Carlin was just amazing. So.
Of course.
In this case, like maybe you're caught on the railroad and you have the tracks here, but you can choose whether the train goes to you or to the other animal or the thing, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you choose to the other thing because you are declaring that your life is more valuable. Now, if you had a standard equivalency for both, maybe you flip a coin, and that's how you determine which one it goes to.
So what you're talking about it's technically true, but I think that actually it's something different. It's not exactly related to morality. You could assign morality to it, but what you're really talking about is basic survival instinct. And if you talk about the morality of natural rights, which we've talked about many times, right? Everybody has a right to live and the right to pursue happiness. So in a similar context, we've got life and death, but then let's say it's not that serious and you're in a situation where you have a chance to choose between like your career and somebody else's, right? Then you're going to choose yours. But is that because you think that you are more worthy than the other person to get promoted? It might be that, but it could also be that you think that you want to provide more for your family. It's a survival situation. So you think of it in one sense, yes, you're taking something from the other being, but you're doing it out of necessity. And so the necessity aspect of it is what changes it. And so this actually brings me to one of my points, which is that one reason why I am vegetarian is because I have a choice. There are people that might not have a choice, which we discussed earlier, but because I have a choice, like right now, if I eat meat, then essentially I am saying that I'm more important than that animal because I have a choice. I can go to the grocery store and buy anything. And there's a lot of options now. I'm not really giving up anything to be vegetarian.
Okay, I'm just trying to understand this the best I can. So I'm gonna just give out like a scenario here. So is it what you're saying with the ethics of, say, it not being like such an issue with, say, subsistence hunting, the fact that okay, here's an example. So imagine there's a man in the middle of the desert and he's been out in the desert for quite some time and he's dying of thirst. Like he's gonna literally die within a couple hours. He doesn't get something to drink. And then he comes across a guy who has water, and this guy sees that he's in need, and he says to this guy, I'll give you water, but you must promise me that you're going to pay me everything that you make in future proceeds. Let's say 50% or something like that. And you're going to be in debt to me for the rest of your life. And this guy, of course, says, oh, yeah, sure, just give me the water. And so he takes the water, and he gets bound to this contract. Now, that contract would not be seen as valid because he didn't actually have a choice in that instance. Like, the morality of that situation goes out the window because whether the survival instinct kicks in, he's not in a state where he's able to make moral decisions because he's in a state of survival. Like, he's going to do whatever he can to survive, and that's just how the base biology works. Whereas if you're in a state where, let's say, you're not going to, die within the next 2 hours because of dehydration or starvation or where it may be, and you have the choice not to make that contract, and you do happen to make that contract, well, that contract's now binding because you actually were in a state where you can make that decision. Is that kind of like, I'm not sure if that's the exact...
Essentially, what I'm saying is that this is a do or die situation, and you're right. So if you offered me that contract at this exact moment, and for some stupid reason I took it because, because I'm an idiot.
Yeah.
And I signed a paper saying I would do that, then that contract would be valid. Yeah. I'm not under duress. There's no reason why I would have to do that right now to get water.
Mm-hmm.
But if you're in a life or death situation, then you have a right to survive,
Mm-hmm.
right? Everybody does.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't mean that everything that you do is justifiable,
Mm-hmm.
but it simply means that we can assign morality to everything, but there's always going to be certain universal truths, and one of those universal truths is that sentient beings will always try to survive.
Mm-hmm. Right. So the base biology will take over, and
Yeah.
if you're in a situation of biology, which just say there's limited choice or no ability for choice, or essentially the choice you'd be making would be going against the biology to such a degree that it wouldn't be like reasonable to expect someone to take that choice, then you can't exactly apply that sense of morality to that thing.
Right. It's like when all those. It's like when all those people got stranded in the mountains. You know what story I'm talking about, right? It was
when they went all cannibal.
What was it? A soccer team, or it was some? I don't know, but yeah, they ended up eating each other,
Yeah.
right? And so normally morally reprehensible, right? But what is? I mean, they were going to die anyway. So what is worse? Cannibalism or everybody dying? So that's kind of what I'm saying, is that if you're in a situation where you don't have a choice, then we call that a moral quandary, right? And so no matter what you do, there's going to be some type of negative outcome. You're going to die, or you're going to commit some act that might be considered immoral. But can we blame the person? Not exactly.
Yeah, well, I've thought about this a lot myself. Like, if I was in like a lifeboat situation where, let's say, it's me and you on the lifeboat, and it seems reasonable that I'm gonna starve to death. Well, I'm not gonna starve to death. I'm sorry, Patrick.
Well, now that I know that, if we're ever in a lifeboat, I'll make sure that you die first.
Shit, this is just like a whole game theory thing. Because if we're in that lifeboat, now that we know that
Most dangerous game.
See, now you know that what my prediction is going to be, or what my act is going to be. You're going to have to like preempt it, and have to preempt it, and then just the very hint of perhaps death or probability that they're going to start killing each other.
So if we ever get on like a plane or a boat together, I'm going to pack a pocket knife inside the life raft.
I'm going to kick a gun. I think a gun will do better. A machine gun or a rocket launcher.
Why didn't I think of that? Why did I bring a knife? Damn it.
Well, you already made that decision. You can't go back on it, so.
Damn it.
So with vegetarianism and your argument here, so it's that there is a choice to be had here. You're not in that state of survival, and therefore it lends. Okay, I think we definitely agree that this fact that there's no state of survival does lend it to be questioned, right? Because it's not the same question as whether you're like stranded in the middle of the desert or like in the jungle and there's no sources of food besides game. Or
Exactly.
Maybe there's like certain like plants out there, but you don't know which plants are poisonous, which one's not. But you see this like deer, and you're like, deer I can eat, right? Right?
Yeah. And let's be honest, if you're trudging through the jungle with high levels of humidity and everything trying to kill you, then chances are you're burning a lot of calories. So it's going to be in your best interest to eat something that's going to sustain you for a long period of time. So that's different. But let's just say, for example, if I ask you right now, like, why do you eat meat? What would you say?
Well, tasty.
Because you like it, right? And I think that's what most people would say. I don't think there are many people that would say, I eat meat because I object to plants, right? Or that there's some type of moral issue with plants, or too many forests have been cut down, so I'm trying to help that by not eating plants. It's not a valid argument. So what I'm telling you is that basically the only reason that you could say for eating meat is that you enjoy it, and so is that enjoyment worth the life of an animal?
So maybe, probably. But I'd also say that the reasons for my eating of meat are not the same as my reasons for not wanting to give up eating meat. All right? Because I could give you like why I like something, right?
Yeah.
But if you were to say, would you give up this thing? I would have different reasons for that, because there's a reason why I do it, but there's another reason why I wouldn't stop doing it. Because, for instance, we're not going to go into the scientific claims because it's more about the ethics, but there might be certain scientific claims about, say, meat having certain health benefits. There's also probably some health negatives as well. It does seem like it's a lot simpler to have, like, say, balanced diet with meat, because meat, it has complete proteins and so on and so forth. So that would be a reason for me not to give up meat. Now, whether that science is contestable or not, that's a whole debatable question right there. But essentially what I'm saying is, like, I don't have a good reason to eat meat, but I have a reason not to stop eating meat.
So, all right, what about this? We talked about the farmers earlier, right? Mm-hmm. What if the government started telling farmers that, all right, we're not going to produce meat anymore. We're going to produce vegetarian stuff, and everybody's going to be vegetarian. Now, obviously, that would be a totalitarian regime. Mm-hmm. Yeah. But let's imagine that happened. And so now everybody has to be vegetarian. But the caveat to that is that we're going to figure out the science, right? We're going to give you different combinations of stuff that you can buy, and we'll give you all these recipes, and everything will be good, and you'll still get the same nutrition, right? Like, what exactly would be the objection to that? If there was no, like, if you could scientifically say that you can get the same benefits from a vegetarian diet, which for the record you can, because I've been doing it for 6 months, and I just had my blood test at my physical, and I'm actually healthier than I was last year, and I'm not deficient in anything. So it's reasonable to argue that if you eat correctly, that you can get the same stuff from being a vegetarian. So if there's no scientific way to debunk it, and it's a personal preference, then what then can we really say is the moral argument for eating animals?
So there's going to be 2 places I'm going to go here. The first place is the idea that there would be a totalitarian government that would, like, make you eat, like, vegetarian options is hilarious. That should be a book. And the funny thing...
That would be if AOC got elected president.
Would be amazing is, like, there'd be those underground meat factories, right? Yeah. People would be trying to get a little bit of bacon, right? And you could have, like... Okay, so there's one view of this where we're in the current context, right? Where people would be, like... in favor of meat, right? And it's like, oh yeah, just gotta get that little bit of juice. It's like same as like alcohol, right?
You got Al Capone going around with slabs of bacon,
right?
Salt pork.
But then you could see, like, let's say at some point in the future, there's some sort of moral establishment that meat is immoral, right? It's immoral to eat meat for whatever reason. And let's say it's established, you could have a book about, underground meat factories where you take chickens and you're just harvesting for their meat, and how it's grotesque and everything. And that's a lot of the opinions people have right now who are, say, vegetarian or vegan, or maybe sometimes just like they're more in favor of free range or factory farming against that. But the second point here is I want to try to rephrase the argument you're making to make sure I understand it. So... Again, discounting we're being hypothetical here, right? With the potential health effects, right? Yeah. Because I don't think we're qualified to talk about the health necessarily, or that's a very scientific claim. But if theoretically, hypothetically, there was option A, which is, let's say, a hamburger, right? And option B, which is like a veggie burger. But this veggie burger is made in a way that it's essentially the same nutritionally as the real hamburger. And let's say that it tastes the same. Is there really a reason morally, or maybe not morally, is it more moral to choose the veggie option than it is to choose the meat option? Is that kind of like the...
Yes, and in that situation, I would say yes, it's more moral to choose the veggie option.
Mm-hmm. And I would say it depends on the price. Because let's say, for me, that the hamburger that is just meat, okay, let's just say the meat burger, the hamburger, is $1 for the burger. Or let's say it's $5. It's a really good burger. It's super tasty. And let's say the veggie burger is $1,000. I'm not going to pay $1,000 for that veggie burger, no matter how equivalent it is, no matter how much more moral it is. Because for me, that morality has a price. There's a cost to it.
Well, so that's true, but I mean, obviously that's hyperbole. Yeah. And like veggie burgers, yeah, they're probably like 75 cents or $1 more than to buy a box of regular burgers, or whatever. And that's true. But I believe part of that too is influenced by consumer demand. And going back to my analogy before, if we sort of move to a situation where the majority of people felt that it was immoral immoral to eat meat, then what you would see is that there would be much more production of these items. And so then when you have mass production of these items and mass consumer demand, then you're going to see the price go down. So right now there's a price variance because the majority preference is for people to eat meat, right? And so if you saw the majority preference shift, then you might start to see the opposite, which is that meat becomes premium price because not everybody wants to buy it. So now you're not getting cheap hamburgers everywhere. The only hamburgers that you see are like the Angus or like the really top end burgers, because the only people who are going to buy them are people who want to pay extra.
So I do agree with your general point there, but I also don't want to invalidate the idea that there is a certain. I mean, some people are going to be unwilling to pay that private. How do I put this? So some people are going to assign that moral difference regardless of price. So they'll never eat the low cost burger no matter what the price is, because morality is morality, right is wrong. Or there's a difference between right and wrong, and it's just immoral to eat this real patty despite the veggie burger being, say, a ton more in price, a lot higher in price. But I don't think most people exist on that spectrum. I think most people assign, like myself, assign a price to that aspect. It's not whether there's a price to the morality that you're paying, that price differential.
Well, yeah, that's exactly my point. I'm just saying that the economics of it actually prove my point.
Oh, okay. I just want to make sure we're not jumping too far ahead. So we agree on that point. There is now I don't think you are in. I think your claim is that price differential, you're not willing to pay, or you're willing to pay that price differential regardless.
Yeah.
I mean, you probably wouldn't pay $1,000 for.
No, I wouldn't pay $1,000.
Yeah. In that case, it becomes like a need of survival, you could argue, right? If all that's available is like veggie burgers and hamburgers.
Well, yeah, if you only make $500 a week, you can't pay $1,000 for one meal.
Okay.
So then you're talking about a survival situation.
Okay, so then the morality kind of goes out the window. The more kind of like marginal cases is where things get more confusing.
Yeah, because the whole place where we started was that we have a choice.
Yeah, right. So, so the extreme end of that, we could agree there's no choice there because the price to sustain yourself would be so high that there's not really a choice in choosing the meat. If there was only two options of food.
Right.
But in the more marginal cases is where it gets kind of interesting. Because on the margin, let's say that the veggie burger is, say, $4, whereas the normal hamburger is $1, right? So it's not like a huge difference, but that difference it's like that difference could matter, or it could have a substantial effect on someone's life as far as sustainability. And some people won't be willing to pay that for that price for the say the increase approaching, so the increased like morality or the increased virtue. Let's say increased virtue there. But the question is, would someone be more morally reprehensible, or say morally less good, if they chose the cheaper option with the beef patty as opposed to the veggie patty, if there's like a $3 difference?
That's a good question. And so I'll answer that in two parts. The first part is, I will say yes, I do think that it is still morally irresponsible to choose the meat when the vegetable option is there. But second part of that would be, I've mentioned this before, I have very libertarian leanings. So do I judge people who eat meat? No. So if you tell me that you can't afford the veggie burger, I'm not going to tell you that you're immoral, because it's not about the cost anyway. You have a choice about what you want to do. That choice could be immoral. But if that choice does not affect me right now, and it doesn't affect my loved ones, I don't have a right to say anything to you based on my libertarian beliefs. So you can eat meat if you want to, but it doesn't change the objective reality to me that that's still less moral than eating the veggie burger. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I'm trying to get this mathematically, because I think this is actually where the entire discussion should actually be laid out pretty well, because I think the way to put it is, let's say that you imagine the price of the veggie burger and the hamburger is the same, right? Let's say you start increasing the price of the veggie burger, right? As the price increases, it's not that it becomes less moral to choose the hamburger. It's more that it becomes more amoral. It's more like in the amoral aspects. It's more like morality doesn't apply because it's more and more of a
Right,
survival
you're saying
situation.
it becomes closer to survival and
Yeah.
less close to what our moral beliefs are.
Yeah.
The more the price goes up on the veggie burger.
Yeah, it's not so much a matter of good and bad. It's a more matter of good and bad not being less applicable to the situation. But then you can make the argument that once you hit that, say, that 1-to-1 ratio, where it's like $1 for each, that is where there is a legitimate moral choice because there's no necessary reason to choose one or the other. Like,
Yeah.
if there's no discernible difference between the two, hypothetically, and people will probably in the comments talk about how there are legit differences, but we're talking about the hypothetical here, the theoretical here.
Right.
And so, assuming there's no actual difference between the two, then what reason is there to choose the meat version than the veggie version? There's not really one. And then you can go into the inverse, where let's say the price of the veggie burger is actually less than the price of the hamburger. Let's say the price of the veggie burger is now 50 cents. So you go from say where the veggie burger is high in comparison with the hamburger, there's moral ambiguity. Then you get to a point where there is a moral kind of turning point where they're say equal, and then or let's say more equilibrium. But then you get to the point where the veggie burger is more cost effective, and you have to go out of your way. You have to pay a price to eat the meat version. And if you're paying the price to eat that meat version, what reason is that? I think is the question you would have
Right.
to answer.
Anything from it being equal to the meat burger being more expensive is where it becomes the question of, well, it's because I prefer it, right? Because there really wouldn't be any other reason if there was nutritional equivalency. So the thing is, though, the economics is only really a small portion of the question, so I don't want to focus too much on it. But I will say that economics tend to reflect the preferences of the market. So going back to what I said before, if people made the moral distinction that, okay, we shouldn't be eating meat because we have the option and because we have the technology and the massive irrigation systems in our farms, and we have the ability to mass produce non-meat products that are replaceable, then why should we eat the meat products? And if the majority of people began to think that way, then what you would see is that the economics would match that. So I think that while the discussion of price point is relevant to a point, it's also not, because the economics actually come after the question. Like, if we ask the question beforehand and we say, all right, let's look at the price points here, then we're talking about people making decisions relative to the price. But if people make decisions relative to the morality, then the price eventually reflects that. And so I realize that you're saying that there might be some upfront cost to that, and that is a legitimate discussion point. But ultimately, if the discussion is it moral or isn't moral, and you land on the side that it isn't moral, and then you convince others of that, then the economics would reflect that.
Well, so why I'm focusing on the economics is because we're, say, giving the point that it is, say, I think most people would agree that if there was no differential there between, say, the prices, that, it's say more moral to choose the veggie option that has less suffering. Now that's taking as a point. I'm not sure if I agree with that, which is something we could explore a little bit. But I think exploring your side of the argument, and also I agree with that side as well to a certain degree, but I also have certain disagreements with it too, because the way I see it, if I was out in the wild, and maybe not even in survival state, maybe just out in the wild in general, I wouldn't have any problems killing animals. Now, when I grew up, I had a big issue killing anything, right? I would catch fish and I'd throw them back. I actually cried one time because I caught a fish and it died, and I brought it back to life. I had Jesus hands.
Yeah, I accidentally boiled an entire fish tank once.
Oh, what?
Yeah, I didn't realize what the temperature dial did, and yeah, it was a bad day.
Okay,
terrible.
You didn't put it on okay.
No. You can adjust. You're supposed to keep it at a certain temperature.
Yeah.
And it was terrible. I felt so bad.
Okay.
But yeah, but basically, we've said this many times before, but if you're in the wild and you kill something, you might not have an issue with it, but it doesn't make it moral.
Well, so I'm not saying it's moral or not, but I'm saying I wouldn't have an issue with in the wild, and certainly things are changed now that we have, say, convenience, but I don't think there's a distinction necessarily between the wild and modern life. Like, there's not like a real confluence of like properties which are different. Like, I wouldn't have a problem if I was living out in the middle of nowhere killing a deer for substance. But, I'm doing the same exact thing here. It's just that the means of killing that deer or that cow, I mean, let's say cow, is more opaque. It's more abstract. It's like I'm paying other people to kill that cow for me.
Right. You're talking about the origins of what you buy at the grocery store. And so in theory, you're kind of still hunting the deer, but you're just getting the deer from the shelf and somebody else hunted it. But that plays to my entire point, which is that if you had a moral discussion in America came to a general consensus that is not okay to eat meat, then the origin would change, because now instead of a bunch of people hunting deer and putting it in grocery stores, you have a general moral consensus that vegetarianism is moral and eating meat isn't. Then what you would have now is that all those people who are currently providing meat, because of the way economics works in a free market, is they would start to produce vegetarian options, which would drive the price down.
So I'm not disagreeing with the economics, I'm disagreeing with the morality or the inherent morality, because I don't think eating meat is necessarily bad, or like my contention is that, so in this economic model that we're talking about, we're assuming that, if the prices are equal, that it's, better to choose the plant option. But I don't know if that's necessarily true. And, you could have some qualifiers in there. Like, obviously, if you're, say, harvesting like from an animal, obviously you don't mistreat that animal. We could talk about factory farming and how that's terrible, and how you shouldn't treat animals, inhumanely. But I could imagine myself, let's say I was interested in being a farmer, and that was going to be my trade. I wouldn't have any issue killing these animals. It's like I actually dated the girl who was, like, her parents had a farm, and she had these pigs, and she had the pigs had names and everything. And you're like, oh man, I love you, Bessie. It's going to be so nice when I get to eat you too. And it's a little bit like gallows humor.
Yeah.
But she legitimately loved the animal, but she also was excited to eat it.
See, I can't. Like, so let's go back towards the beginning of the discussion and to kind of get to this point here, because what we talked about in the beginning, right, was sentient beings deserving respect, mm-hmm. and whether animals are considered on the same level as humans when it comes to being sentient beings, right? Mm-hmm. And let me take that to another place, right? Because with Buddhism, we believe in spiritual energy and sort of karmic reaction to the earth, mm-hmm. right? So everything has energy that comes and goes. There's a finite amount that's stored within everything in the earth. And so if you believe that, then what you have to think about what's more renewable, right? And in this case, plants are more renewable. I mean, you can plant a garden, and 3 months later, you can have a bunch of vegetables, right? And how long does it take you exactly to make a pig that's ready to be eaten? And like, how sustainable is that versus if you had all the production that we were doing that was going into making animals right now, but instead we were making plant options, right? And additionally, you have to think about the effect that it has spiritually on everything. I mean, I realize that when you make a spiritual argument, not everybody's going to agree with that, but like, what would you say to that if I'm saying to you that like the production of plants is more sustainable than the mass production of animals?
So that's not a moral argument necessarily. It's a more economic argument, and I agree with the economic argument, but it doesn't necessarily make my, say, moral position inaccurate. So, for instance, I did a little bit of research into this. There's some people who are wanting to, instead of, say, making cow patties and cow burgers, that they want to make like grasshopper burgers. Why? Well, because grasshoppers are much more efficient, and they also don't taste bad, I guess, if you like prepare them in the right way. And you can grind them up and make essentially patties and burgers and lots of different food out of them. And they're very nutritious. They have more protein. And there's a lot of benefits to, say, bugs. And most of the world eats bugs, but the Western world doesn't. We're very opposed to it. And so there's many different economic arguments to move towards eating insects as opposed to, say cows. But and also you could say there's some moral components there because insects are, say, less of a living conscious entity than a cow is. So there's certain moral components that as well, which speak to your thing. But it convinces me from an economic argument and sustainability argument, but I'm not really convinced by a moral case per se, because essentially, yes, that cow has consciousness. Yes, that cow is a living entity, and maybe it's considered in something, but I don't put it on the same, say, level as a human in any case, in any kind of way. I think it's something which is totally distinct and different.
So I think it's important actually to define what exactly I mean by moral, because everybody has a different perspective on that. But I'm strictly, in this case, speaking from a utilitarian standpoint when I say that the mass production of plants is more moral than the mass production of chickens, for example. I'm talking about from a utilitarian standpoint because we're talking it's going to take more economic power and efficiency to make all those chickens, produce all those eggs, and whatnot than it's going to take to produce all the plants. And so, I mean, from the economic side, I'm looking at it and from a utilitarian standpoint. But also, I will say that I'm not an expert, so there's a very high chance that someone who's a farmer might disagree with me. The economic argument is not actually where I want to go with that. And
So I think we can agree that it's, from a utilitarian point of view, granted that, say, production of plants or, say, plant-based materials is more efficient, that it would be more moral from a utilitarian point of view. I think utilitarian has some benefits to it, but I don't think I subscribe to it as a dominating philosophy. And as far as I know, you don't subscribe to it as a dominating philosophy as well, because as we've had conversations before, we talk about how liberty and autonomy can often override the utility or utilitarian viewpoint or philosophy. And I think there's also certain overriding methods for it. And of course, I think that if you can assert that maybe there's some value to more of a vegetarian or sort of, say, economy, or let's say there's some utility to vegetarianism being, say, the default perspective on the way of things, that is an argument, but I don't think it's a fully encompassing argument.
Yeah, so you're right. Autonomy, liberty, freedom, those qualities would override utilitarianism in conflicting moral quandaries. And that's what W.D. Ross argued with his theory of prima facie deontology, is that there's a hierarchy of duties. And so your economic duty to, utilitarian economics would obviously be below the priority of the autonomy and liberty of sentient beings. So that's where you would say, okay, even if there was an economic equivalency between the chickens and the plants when it comes to the economic production, then you would still choose the plants because the deontological duty to protect liberty and autonomy of sentient beings would put the chickens above the plants. Because while plants do have some biological function, they're not sentient the same way that animals are.
See, I think that a disagreement that I'm having here is the duty to protect sentient beings, because I don't think I have that obligation or that moral. It's nice if we can, but I don't see it as a moral quandary.
Well, so okay, this is way, way out of left field, man. But I'm just gonna throw it out there, right? And I'm a science fiction writer, so this is where my mind goes.
Okay.
But let's say that you ever heard the Great Barrier Theory? Well, whatever. That's another podcast. Let's say that there's a barrier and there's an alien species out there that we don't know about. Their technology is so advanced we can't see them. And then one day they decide to interact with us, right?
Yeah.
And they're so advanced that we are to them the equivalent that pigs are to humans, right? They don't understand our language. It's a bunch of grunts to them, right? We're a backwards, unorganized civilization. We seem like animals. So is it then the same for them? Is it then okay for those aliens to say, well, because they're animals, I don't subscribe to that. They're not within our Mandela. See, that's the problem you run into, is that when you say that even though you acknowledge that animals are sentient beings, because they're not critically thinking and they're not the same as humans, that it's okay to treat them that way, right? And we could ourselves be in that situation.
Well, I mean, who am I to really argue against their sense of morality? I mean, they're just doing what they're doing, right? I mean, certainly we can assign some sort of ethical, qualities that we have to them, but if they determine that this is ethical for them to do, and they believe they're higher beings and they want to do this to us, I mean, it's the same exact thing as a bear attacking us. I mean, the bear doesn't have that sense. Maybe the bear has that sense of morality in this case, where the aliens have to have that sense of morality. But the fact that we're disagreeing with their sense of morality is, I don't know.
Well, the difference is that the bear is attacking you out of instinct. It's either because the bear is trying to protect something, or it perceives you as a threat in some way, with the exception of maybe the brown bear, who's very vicious. But most bears do not pursue humans in the first place. They don't wake up in the morning and say that they're going to try and find a human to eat. It's a reactionary thing. And so the thing with humans is that we're critically thinking. So the exact moral issue is that we can think about it and that we have choice. The bear does it out of instinct. The bear doesn't sit there and say, well, is it moral or immoral for me to attack this guy, right? The bear just does it.
So I still have an issue with this argument, because we're assuming that there is like if your position is that if there was this higher being, that we would wish to be spared by them, and then thus we should spare other things. Like, I don't think that's true. And this kind of goes back to our last conversation in podcast number 1. Check it out if you haven't already. But where, the argument you had in the case of, let's say, there's a drowning person in the middle of a lake, that you should save that person because if you're in that situation where you're drowning yourself, you want to be saved. Of course, if I'm in that position, I want to be saved. I want to be spared, in the case of the aliens attacking. But there's no obligation for the other entity to act in that way, right? I don't have this obligation, I don't think, to save that drowning person. In the same way, I don't think this alien race has the obligation to treat me in a moral aspect.
You know what? I totally agree. If the aliens decide to eat us, then who cares? That's their decision. But
it's not who cares. It's more like what can we do?
Yeah. Well, remember though that the conclusion of the water thing was that I said, you do have a right to not save the person in the lake, but it's still not the most morally conscious thing to do. Is it exactly immoral? That's a gray area. But I'm telling you the same thing here, is that if you're eating meat when you have a choice to not do it, then is it exactly morally reprehensible? I wouldn't go that far, but I would say that it is more moral to eat the plant in a situation where you have a choice, because of this scenario that we're talking about, all right? Because if we ever have somebody that has a choice of whether or not to eat us, we would hope they wouldn't eat us, just like the drowning situation.
I mean, I would say we'd hope they wouldn't, but the choice they make is the choice they make, and we just have to deal with that choice. You could say that choice is, if let's say they have the moral capability of choosing, maybe they made the wrong choice, right? Because I think eating meat and killing meat is a bad choice. But we can't just assign that choice to be immoral because it benefits us for it to be immoral.
But we can, and actually, I think we need to do a whole podcast about just this, because I know we disagree, but I think there are universal moral principles, and I think that you actually can objectively decide what's moral and immoral. Whether that person has a choice, again, being a libertarian, you can choose what you want, but that choice does not determine morality. I think morality is an objective thing that we can assign criteria to, and whether you choose or not choose it doesn't change that assignment.
Okay. Now, you would agree that... Okay, let's... I just want to make sure that we're on the same page as far as my view here. Because my view is that eating and killing animals is fine, and let's say we're this higher being, I'm okay with, us killing those animals and eating them. If a higher alien species is in the same position as us, and they determine that we're the same thing as the animals, and they want to kill us, I mean, it's the same exact position. I don't have a problem with that. I mean, of course, I'm going to fight back, but it's not like I'm being, contradictory there. You'd agree, right?
No, I agree.
Okay.
You're consistent. I just think you're wrong.
Oh, okay. I just want to make sure. Okay, because I think even if we're in, this goes back to our conversation about values. Yeah. we have different viewpoints here, but so long as we agree about why I'm wrong, it's worth it.
No, I don't think you're contradicting yourself.
Okay. The only problem I have sometimes is when we get into like super like in-depth stuff, it feels like it always feels like when someone disagrees that they don't agree with they're saying they're contradictory, but you're disagreeing with the overarching point, the morality aspect.
Yeah, there's a lot of splitting hairs with us because we go really deep into this.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So and I'm sure the listeners are a little bit confused as well.
Yeah.
And they're probably screaming at me, being like, you don't have a problem with aliens killing you? Well, of course they don't.
Yeah, because we already established at the beginning of this that my position is the one that society feels is automatically virtuous.
Yeah.
Which I also disagree with. I don't think people should automatically assign virtue to things, just like they shouldn't automatically hate things.
Mm-hmm. And I want to be like clear and upfront here. Like, as far as what I'm saying, it's from a hypothetical point of view, as far as, killing animals and such. Because it's the same thing with like a drowning person. Like if I see a drowning person out in the middle of a lake, I am most likely going to go out and save that person. I mean, maybe if they're like 500 pounds, probably not, because I'm going to drown myself. There's certain...
Yeah.
If it's a little small child, yes, I'm definitely going to save them. If a small child in the middle of like an icy lake, maybe... because I don't know. I don't know how well I can swim in ice. But there's certain things to that. So it's not like I'm saying I would... have that exact action, right?
Right.
But I'm also saying that I think the principle is the same for me. The principle is that killing animals is fine. I'm just paying someone else to kill the animal. And also, I think realistically, going back to the economics, if it was cheaper or the same cost for, say, the vegetarian option as opposed to the meat-based option, I would choose the vegetarian option. Why? Because, it's less, say, cost on the animals. Maybe it's just more economic reasons, but I also think that, animals not suffering as much and not having to kill animals for no reason is better. But at the same time, I think it's not immoral for me to choose to eat meat. But if the costs, there's more of a cost to, killing the animal than there is to other stuff, I agree that I would probably choose the other option. But I don't think that's a moral consideration. I mean, it's a maybe a virtue consideration, but it's not like a moral consideration for me, if that is any...
Yeah, I think that we probably just have to settle on what we have, because you have the perspective you just laid out, and mine is that I wouldn't say that it's immoral. I've said this a couple times. I wouldn't say it's immoral, but I think there are two situations, and one is a little bit more immoral than the other one. And so, I mean, most people that I know eat meat. To be honest, my wife eats meat, and I love my wife. But I'm just telling you that, like, if you have two choices and they're basically equivalent, taking out all the economic and survival extremes that we've discussed, two basically equivalent situations, there's a more moral choice, which is vegetarianism.
Yeah. Okay. Now, you brought up veganism a little earlier, and you probably shouldn't go too far in depth in this because I know you got to get home soon. Yeah. But I'm interested in your views on that because you never talked to me about that before.
So, I mean, just briefly, it's just an extension of the perspective I already have, which is that vegans don't eat animal byproducts. So, right now, I switched to vegetarian about 7 months ago, and so I've been getting more and more towards vegan and just eliminating different products in my diet. It turns out that there are animal byproducts in almost everything, but it's come a long way with there being options for that. But anyway, essentially, I don't eat eggs now. I don't eat milk, but I still eat butter and cheese. And the idea is that if you're not going to kill the animal, then when you become a vegan, then you're not eating any animal products, so there's no animal suffering at all. Because like even if, let's say we stop eating chickens tomorrow, but everybody's still eating eggs, we're still going to mass produce chickens and keep them in cages so we can get their eggs. So we're not killing them, but we're just keeping them in cages their whole life. So it's sort of the same thing, not quite as extreme, but you get what I'm saying.
Yeah. There's kind of this is something I've thought about, and it's nothing like a unique thought I've had or anything, but there's kind of a contradiction it's not even a contradiction, but there's not like an admission, because it's like if we stopped, say, harvesting chickens, either for their bodies or for their eggs or whatever byproducts they might have that we produce them for, I think it's likely that chickens will go extinct. Same with cows. I mean, maybe there'll be some cows. People keep a couple cows as pet. But, the utility for cows, the reasons why we have so many cows and chickens and these other animals are because of their utility. And if we stop using them, if we go fully vegan, there's no reason to have these animals around. Also, chickens and cows, they're not typical animals. Like, these are domesticated animals. Like, you can't have a cow out in the wild anymore. Like, that's not a thing.
That's true. I mean, they've been domesticated for so many years. And that's a whole other discussion, but yeah.
And like even wild turkeys. So here's a fun fact about turkeys. Wild turkeys are a thing, right? So those things are fine. But domesticated turkeys, they have bred those things to such an extreme that male turkeys can't copulate with female turkeys because we breed them to have like the largest breasts possible, and the breast essentially just gets in the way, and their penis or their coincula, whatever it might be, can't actually reach to the vagina. So they actually can't inseminate the female turkey. So almost every single turkey you see on the shelf that is from a farm is artificially inseminated.
Jeez, what kind of life is that?
It's like one or, well, they still get like a hand job or something. I don't know how it works. I mean,
that's like an anime gone wrong or something.
I saw this one episode, I think it was Dirty Jobs, and they essentially just gave a horse a hand job, and then they milked it. And they're like, okay, now we got this. Let's shove it up the other horse's vagina. And it's like, what the fuck is going on?
And then we find out that's where almond milk comes from, and none of this makes sense. All right, we meant a certain kind of almonds.
Yeah.
All right. Well, anyway, I think it was a productive discussion. I don't think we 100% agree, but that's all right. That's, what dialogue is for.
So. And at the very least, we found out where we disagree and what the absolute tenet is, which is that if the aliens come down and decide to fuck us, well, let's hope they don't. I mean, I hope that they don't, but if they choose to fuck us, go ahead. Yeah. If they want to alien for me, please don't. But if you end up doing it, to me. Oh, okay. Wow.
It's a vegetarian stuff.
Oh, okay. Yeah. That's the induction into the I'm gonna say religion. It's not religion.
If you want to go full vegan, you've got to do it.
You got to get that anal probing. And speaking of anal probing, if you want to subscribe to us, click on the subscribe button or the like button, or click on just the comment button and say, hey guys, we disagree with you fully because X, Y, and Z reasons. Leave a very lengthy comment that no one will read because that will just be incredible.
Yeah, and if you disagree with me, then you're immoral, and I don't want to hear it.
Well, you're especially immoral, and you're not going to get the anal probe, so too bad for you.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks a lot.
This was Do We Exist? What was the name of our podcast again?
Does it matter?
Well, does it matter to meat or not? Well, does it matter?